In my last video talking about Avowed, we took a look at how a lot of players were turned off between the stark contrast that the teaser trailer had and the tone that was set there versus the gameplay reveal and what people saw. Today I wanted to take a little bit of a different approach, looking at how Avowed can solidify itself as a strong new fantasy RPG by building upon some of the good and the bad of the Outer Worlds. Let's get into it. The Outer Worlds as a whole, I genuinely think is a solid game. It's not the best RPG of all time, but it was pretty good, especially at the time when it released. It sort of filled this void that titles like Fallout 4 were distinctly lacking on the choice and consequence side of things. In fact, even if you go and look at some of the reviews that are left today, you'll see that generally speaking, they are positive. People had a good time with the Outer Worlds. Now, the Spacer's Choice Edition, not so much if you look at the Steam reviews, but that's largely because it released with a lot of bugs that weren't even present in the original game. It added more bugs than the launch of the original.
This enemy just refuses to attack me. Just straight up refuses to attack me. And this happened multiple times. I'd be standing in front of enemies shooting my companions and they just would not attack me at all. This is in a really bad spot right now.
Even if you look at critic reviews of the game, they're largely positive. It sat really well with audiences. One of the areas that I think near unanimously it really did succeed was with the writing specifically and the dialogue, two elements that Obsidian excels on beyond many other RPG studios. Specifically in the Outer Worlds, the companions and the writing involving them was always a treat to be involved in, and that's also attributable to the performances that were in the Outer Worlds. They did a great job with the casting and the voice actors, so I hope it gets that similar level of attention. I'd be surprised if it didn't. And if the teaser trailer, the gameplay trailer, is anything to go on, it's definitely at least maintaining, if not improved, the quality bar there.
Are they here to save us? Or destroy us.
But the dialogue offered different outcomes and branching paths like you might expect, and if you didn't get your way, you always had the option to simply
You think you're tough waving that thing around?
Are you crazy?
Yeah, like other Obsidian titles, you can go around and murder hobo every single NPC in the game, and the game will respond and react and adjust accordingly to that, and that's a testament to good writing. It's one of the reasons why I feel strongly that Baldur's Gate 3 resonates so well, because of that player agency, that player freedom that it presents. It says you want to be the complete demon of this world, go for it. Embrace that. The writing and dialogue for companions specifically was one of the highlights that absolutely must carry into the Outer Worlds. And it's already been stated there's going to be a large emphasis on companions and their stories and how they're handled. But even still, there's ways that this, I think, could actually be further improved. And that's leaning into some of what Pentiment had to offer. Pentiment, once again, I think was a testament to the writing skill and talent that's at Obsidian, that for a lot of other open world, which technically Avowed I wouldn't consider open world, it's more like KOTOR, but other RPGs usually struggle to get right. Pentiment 100% relied on its dialogue systems, and that game as well, overwhelmingly positive user reviews on Steam and very well received by critics on Metacritic. One of the unique ways that Pentiment handles its dialogue is even if you have a particular skill for a speech check in the game, it's not always a positive result based on the companion you're talking to. And Josh Sawyer on Twitter explained that working on some of those smaller projects like Grounded, like Pentiment, helped to continue to fuel ideas and contribute to some of the improvements and changes that you see in the larger projects such as Avowed. It makes dialogue a lot more engaging, a lot more tactical, and I think you could even take this a step further by borrowing some systems. I don't expect this one in the game, and I think this could even be taken a step further by taking inspiration from Kingdom Come Deliverance. Kingdom Come Deliverance featured a system I was surprised that studios did not try to, major AAA releases, modern ones at least, did not try to emulate, which is when you're talking to NPCs in the game, your gear that you're wearing, the condition of your person, will affect the way that dialogue transpires. Your ability to persuade or intimidate foes, for example, can be influenced if you're wearing rags versus heavy plate armor. You even had a cleanliness, you had to wash periodically, so if you tried to talk to a noble or a duke or some kind and you were just absolutely filthy, good luck with that. It was a very clever system, and it just made you think a little bit more outside the box. I know some people wouldn't want that level of immersion that I'm describing, but it's just ways that you can make dialogue feel much more tactical that doubles down on what I think Obsidian already does very, very well. I am aware of criticisms that some people have of the Outer Worlds being more or less a talking simulator, that they don't really jive with that sort of style of game, and that's totally fine. I think perhaps the Obsidian formula might not be for you. Not every game can be made for every type of player, and as much as I understand, I as well want to see what Obsidian's take would be on the big Bethesda-style open-world RPG, but not at the expense of some of the other areas that we know they do very strongly, which I think might be the case, and that's why they actually pivoted away from that design. I could go on a massive tangent on this, so I'm gonna stop here. All of this good writing, really strong dialogue, what it lends itself well to is another element the Outer Worlds truly excelled at, in my opinion, which was choice and player freedom, the ability to do what you want and see the consequences, which is the part that a lot of other games do struggle with, of those actions. You can't have a strong dialogue system, in my opinion, that's really complex without proper choice and consequence that follow it, and this is something I don't think I even need to spend too much time speaking to. The gameplay trailer's main focus does emphasize what role are you going to be playing in Aora and the Living Lands, and how are you going to shape it. That to me is compelling enough evidence. We're going to get more, which I'm very excited about, and I'm interested to see how Obsidian is going to play that level of impact on a pre-existing IP, on an existing world. We even have that shot in the trailer where the player's walking away from the bodies that are all scattered across the floor, and again, I think you'll have that opportunity to completely go in as a homicidal maniac, which I'm glad. Sometimes you just need to let out all of your frustrations on a pack of innocent guards. Now, you could have all of the coolest weapons in the world, that's not going to save you from poor combat systems that you have, and that is where one of my biggest complaints with the Outer Worlds came from. That and exploration, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. The combat in the Outer Worlds, I felt, largely suffered due to relatively poor AI. It was there, it was serviceable, but at times it was pretty disappointing. And combat in the Outer Worlds never really felt that dynamic, which was one of the biggest pain points. And arguably speaking, with the fantasy IP, that's both easier and more difficult. The more difficult aspect is how the AI behaves during combat. It's one thing to just take a group of enemies and the AI says, hey, we all have swords, charge the player. That's all well and good, and that's fun, how you maneuver about that and get out of a sticky situation, but you can't do that for every encounter. And I don't think it's enough these days to just simply say, well, we have melee enemies, and then there's also ranged guys that are shooting bows at you from afar. And of course there'll be spellcasters thrown in the mix as well, but that's not really enough. Where really innovative and more fun gameplay, more tactical gameplay comes from is how the AI actually behaves. To have some enemies who are more brash, who will charge you, versus other enemies who will stay back, they play more defensively. Then maybe a third type of enemy that will try to flank and sneak around you while you're distracted with the heavy tank. And even this, you can take a step further. Enemies with different resolve, they see you took out two of their friends and they flee the battle. It gives you this rush of a bit of that power fantasy that we're probably seeking when you play these types of games. But also it just makes the world feel alive. It makes it feel believable. There's this mechanic I've always wanted to see. I don't think games have either done this before, or at least haven't done it too well. And if there is an example you know of, let me know. But where you're fighting a warrior and he has a big kite shield and a long sword and you're going up against him. He lands a couple good hits on you. He thinks he has the upper hand in battle, so he starts attacking more aggressively, and you could actually use that to your advantage. I've never seen systems like that. I'm not expecting an Avowed, but that would be phenomenal. And then smaller things as well. For example, with tactical time dilation in the Outer Worlds, I did think it was a cool mechanic where you could target certain parts of their body that might either blind them or cripple them or make them bleed. I appreciated that a lot, actually. Such a system absolutely will help it stand out from the Elder Scrolls, which they never really had anything like that. You have crippled limbs in Fallout, but it was never really transferred over for their Elder Scrolls series. But bringing it a step back a little bit, based on what we've actually seen in the gameplay trailer, the spells will probably go a pretty long way to make combat feel more dynamic. Some Dishonored-like powers that you could utilize and completely manipulate the battlefield. And lastly, having great combat is really important, but it still needs to take place at interesting locations, and that's where the exploration comes into play. I personally never had an issue with the smaller hub-like areas, similar to what we had in Knights of the Old Republic 2, for example. I didn't mind that. I know it took away for some players with that grand open world feeling, and I would expect some of these areas to be more expansive. Even if you look at some of the gameplay trailer shots, it does look a little bit wider to me. Because they're going with this smaller format, this more isolated individual zones, you think to yourself, okay, how can they make it more interesting? How can they level it up from what we've seen in the past? Combining more interesting ruins, caves, forts, and other fantasy-themed dungeons around the landscape, each with not necessarily every single one of them, but ones that do have interesting stories that we know Obsidian is really good at, isolated within them. And Avowed was pitched to be the studio's take on the Elder Scrolls. If anything was to be taken away from that, I hope it is the way that Bethesda does their dungeons. To this day, I don't think any game really achieves dungeons and populating the world space the way that games like Skyrim have. One of my absolute favorite Skyrim dungeons to date was one in which you get caught by a necromancer. You go for a treasure chest, you fall down a trapdoor, or another one where there's a wizard and a warrior sitting outside one of the dungeons, and you get to tag along with them and go through and explore the ruins together. You get to meet them, learn about them. They have unique dialogue. It was more fun than just a bunch of books left around or notes or letters that tell the story that you have to read through it. And as far as exploration goes, and just the general world space, I guess, is probably more appropriate. For me, one of the areas I thought Outer Worlds really struggled was that the world just felt dead. I mean, the opening moments of the game, you get to the Emerald Vale and then you make it to Edgewater, and I understand that town is having problems and people left and there's this whole other thing going on. But it was empty, it felt devoid, pretty lifeless, and this is one of the strongest areas I feel Avowed can also improve. Even in the general world space while you're out and about, like the Elder Scrolls does, with foxes and rabbits and deer that are roaming around, on top of the random spawn of creatures that might be there, or a frostbite spider that's sitting over a bandit that it killed that both randomly spawned together. That helps a lot to make the world feel more dynamic, and you don't realize it until it's gone, and it was definitely gone in a game like the Outer Worlds. So those are the thoughts of someone who genuinely did enjoy the Outer Worlds. I know there's a lot more and different complaints and differing opinions that are out there, so understanding that Avowed is going to have more in common with the Outer Worlds than Skyrim, what are you looking forward to seeing, and what are you hoping to see during the developer direct? Let me know down in the comment section below. Consider subscribing if you need more fantasy RPG content in your life. And as always, I hope to see you all next time. So long, everybody.